Hello, everyone. You've tuned into the Indiana State Police Roadshow, brought to you by the Indiana State Police Alliance and the Indiana State Police Alliance Cops for Kids, a subsidiary of the Indiana State Police Alliance. We want to thank them for their continued support. I want to thank Tom Trial, our man behind the scene, for putting us on the Indiana State Police YouTube channel each and every week, and for what he does for our show. With me today, a new guest that I've never had on the show with me before, Glenn Augustine. Glenn is the Vice President of Advancement for Indiana Youth Institute. Thank you for coming, Glenn.
Well, thanks for having us on the show. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here today, and something that I've never really had a lot to do with, but I met somebody that is with your organization, and it sounds very, very interesting what you guys do. Tell me a little bit about the Indiana Youth Institute and what they do.
Well, we were established in 1988 by Lilly Endowment, really as a response to youth workers across the state who said they didn't know where to turn when they had questions about data or youth issues, or they were feeling isolated in their work. And so after about a 2-year study looking at youth issues, not only in Indiana but across the country, and then how Indiana sort of was a reflection of what was going on across the U.S., Lilly Endowment formed the Indiana Youth Institute. We're here to serve youth workers. So we don't serve children directly.
Okay.
We serve those who work with youth, and we define youth worker pretty broadly. It can be a teacher, a school counselor. It can be the person working at the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA or Big Brothers Big Sisters. It can be somebody who has their own mentoring organization, youth ministers. Anybody who works with youth on a day-in, day-out basis, we consider to be youth workers, and we try to serve them. We serve about 10,000 statewide.
Wow.
And our mission is that we support and promote positive youth development by supporting those people, institutions, and communities who work with youth. So we're a premier trainer in youth development. We're also a provider of non-biased, nonpartisan data on youth issues.
Right.
And then we're there to help people whenever when they call us and have a question, hey, how can you help me? We try to figure out ways that we can help those youth workers do a better job. What we really want to do is not only increase the capacity of youth workers to do a better job telling them about best practices in youth work,
right,
training them in those so they can do a better job individually with the children they work with, but also on a larger scale, working with those organizations, consulting, evaluation, those sorts of things. So the organizations are more sustainable and stronger and able to help more kids. The more people we have pouring into the lives of children,
absolutely,
the better it's going to be for those children to develop healthily and to become happy, healthy, productive adults.
So do you host events with local communities and things?
We do. We not only host statewide opportunities, we have a conference every year the week after Thanksgiving, so that might fall in November or December, that draws about 1,600 people to the Indiana Convention Center here in Indianapolis. We also have something called Youth Worker Cafes, and those are in about 60 communities across the state, and we have 8 people who work out of their homes across the state, so we truly are statewide, and they each cover a certain number of counties so that we make sure they're able to cover their territory and meet with everybody in those places. They're called outreach managers. Our outreach managers form community partnerships, and they find out what community partners need. All communities deal with some of the same issues, but you really find they deal with them in very unique ways, or they present themselves in unique ways in different communities. So we work with those community partners, try to find out the issues that are pressing in their communities, and then work with them to set up what we call these youth worker cafes, typically 3 in a community per year. And they're lunch and learns, where we buy lunch, we help them find a speaker, and we bring people from across the community, not only to talk about that topic, but what we find is that people then start to share resources so that the community becomes stronger knit in working together to address those issues.
Now, if say a person from that community can't attend, is there a way that they can find out this information?
Well, typically we have a lot of information on our website. Also, they can reach out to that outreach manager from their local community. If you go to our website and look up, and our website is www.IYI for IndianaYouthInstitute.org. You can look up your region by county. It'll show you who your local outreach manager is and contact information for them. So you may be able to reach out to that outreach manager as well and say, hey, I wasn't at this. Can you kind of point me to some resources? And the outreach managers often can do that.
I've looked at your website, and I've noticed before looking at this stuff that you guys do a lot with different areas of the families. Communities, economics, education, health and safety. So you cover all facets pretty well, don't you?
We do. We really try, and a lot of that work comes through our Kids Counting Indiana data book, which we just released recently. Right. And the data book looks at 5 factors in youth development. We look at families and communities. We look at physical health. We look at economic well-being. We look at education. And so with that data book, we also look at safety in that as well. So with that data book, what we're trying to do is gather the best data available from original sources and non-biased data. So a lot of that information comes from the state of Indiana, quite frankly.
Right.
But then we look at other sources as well and really try to look at providing all this information so that when people in their communities are trying to figure out what's going on, why are they seeing this issue creep up? How can they address it? That information, then they can quantify it by coming to us and trying to find data, not only statewide data, but we can also help them compare what's happening in their communities to national data and in many times school district data, so they can really drill down to what's happening particularly in their communities.
One of the areas that caught my attention, being a line of work that I am, and is unfortunate, is the area of incarcerated parents. What did you find out about that?
Well, about 21% of Indiana high school students have a parent who has served time in jail.
Wow.
And so that's a pretty high number when you think about it. And, national estimates say that about 62% of women and 51% of men in state prisons have children younger than 18. So you can imagine what the impact on the family is. A family is missing a parent. That
Yes.
can mean that they're missing income while that parent is in custody. It can also mean in a situation where the family is no longer together that the parent in custody may not be able to pay child support. So the children in those cases often experience not only isolation from that parent and the influence they may have on their lives. Now, sometimes if the parent's in jail, that doesn't mean they would be a positive influence on their lives, but there still is a connection that can be formed there. And if a person is in prison and getting serious about rehabilitation, the Indiana Department of Corrections actually has wonderful programs to try to keep families and their children connected while they're in jail. Because what DOC has found, and what's been found nationally, is that the more you can keep that incarcerated parent connected to their child, the better it's going to be for them on reentry, the more serious they may be about reforming their lives and getting back on a straight path. And there's positive benefits for the child as well, keeping that connection with the parents. So, the other thing is you've probably seen in your line of work, oftentimes criminal activity as well as other behaviors are cyclical. They repeat themselves in families.
Exactly.
And so, when you see a large percentage of children having parents in jail, you want to make sure that you have programs or opportunities in place for them to have additional healthy development so that they're not don't get themselves caught in that cycle later on in life.
So did your organization work with volunteers like from CASA and other with the system throughout the jail to help implement this?
No, we don't work necessarily with them. What we try to do is promote that those programs are out there. So oftentimes youth workers will say, I've got this kid a teacher will say, I've got this kid in my class that's acting out. And oftentimes teachers are really that first line of defense. They see what's happening in their classroom and can help identify it. But then they don't know. They start to drill down with the child. Hey, what's going on? What's happening? And then, my dad's in prison or my mom's in prison. I'm living with so-and-so, and then oftentimes though the teacher or the school doesn't know where to turn. So we try to provide that information that's out there to make it available so that they know that there are places they can turn, maybe to get that child connected with one of these Department of Corrections programs so that there could be some work on that family situation. You mentioned CASA. We have had a long-running relationship with CASA. We have something called the Kids Count Radio Minutes that air on about 150 stations across the state. And once a year, we try to promote CASA volunteerism. It's a really outstanding program where people can volunteer to become a CASA. They'll train you. It's about 40 hours of training, but they'll train you to become a CASA, and you start to work with a child whose family is involved in the judicial or the child welfare system. And a very high percentage, these are volunteers,
Yep.
but they're well trained, and the courts accept about 80% of the recommendations made by CASA volunteers. That speaks to the training that they receive
Absolutely.
and the seriousness with which they take that volunteer opportunity. And so what happens, a victim of child abuse, the more times than not, they were abused by a family member, so they can't go back into their home, and that parent can't be their advocate when they're in the court. So they need an advocate, and that's where the court-appointed special advocates, or CASAs, come into play and help those children with an advocate. And some of the stories, the success stories that come from that, are remarkable. The way CASAs stay involved in children's lives, and how we've seen adults who say, if it wouldn't have been for that CASA volunteer, I wouldn't have made it. So if you're interested in finding out about that, you can go to childadvocatesnetwork.org. That's childadvocatesnetwork.org, and find out about being a CASA volunteer.
Yeah, we've actually had their representative, or one of the representatives, on our show here before also, and they do a fantastic job in what they do. And like you said, it's totally volunteer, and it is a great, great program that we need to promote again on the program.
So I hope what you're seeing is, oftentimes we're not the ones, as I said, we don't work directly with children. We try to work with the people who work with children and equip them with the resources. So we have a lot of information at our fingertips, and that's why sometimes people say, I just don't know where to turn.
Yeah.
Call us. We can often point you to where to turn when we're not out there doing some of that work directly with the communities. We can, or with youth workers in training and in consulting and evaluations that we do a lot, we can just try to put them in touch with that information, because there are programs existing. We're not trying to duplicate programs. Right. When the programs are working, point the person to the program that works, get them connected there, and that's how the child will eventually get help.
Work smarter, not harder.
That's right.
Well, I saw also when we was looking at the some of your other statistics that you have on here, that child poverty is kind of an alarming statistic there, isn't it?
It really is. More than 1 in 5 children in the state of Indiana live in poverty. And when you look at Indiana's low unemployment rate, you say, well, why is that? Less than 5% of the adult population is unemployed, or less than 6%. What it typically says is that wages are just not keeping pace with the cost of living. And, when the recession happened in 2008, 2009, while we've seen unemployment go back down, and we're starting to see wages creep back up again, but what often happens in a situation like that is the poverty numbers lag behind, and that's because somebody lost a job where they were making a really good living, and they're now either unemployed or underemployed. So sometimes they took jobs that they only earned half of their salary, and they had a severe change in lifestyle. So child poverty in Indiana is higher than the national average. That's alarming to us. There are a variety of reasons why that's of a concern. Children in poverty tend to have more stress. They tend to not fare as well in school. They tend to act out more than those who are not in poverty. And it can actually have an impact on their physical health. So there are a lot of reasons why, when you look at a child in poverty, there are just so many factors working against them. And when we say we're trying to promote a healthy development, that's really where those community resources have to jump in and try to help a child. One of the things you see happening, especially in near areas with high poverty, is children often don't know where their next meal is coming from. Think about you when you get, we've seen these commercials now, right, with a famous candy bar where the people are what we would call hangry, right? Yeah. They're hungry and angry, but they're angry because they're hungry. A lot of children who eat meals in school through either free breakfast or free lunch, those may be the only 2 meals they get during a day. Mm-hmm. Think about what happens on the weekends or during summer breaks when they're not being fed at school. They won't eat. Mm-hmm. So you see these backpack programs that try to give kids backpacks. And in some places, they don't have enough backpacks to go with every kid who needs one. So there are lots of community resources out there we try to put people in contact with so that they can try to get children the help that they need.
Well, excellent. And unfortunately, Glenn, we've run out of time already. Man, we barely got into this. Can you come back again sometime?
Absolutely. Myself or Tammy Silverman, our president and CEO, would love to come back and talk anytime we can. We really appreciate the work the state police have done. You guys have exhibited at our conference with your programs as well. We appreciate that. And just the more we can work together to try to get this information out there and talk to people, the better chance kids will have at a healthy
wonderful
life.
Well, again, I've had Glenn Augustine, the Vice President of Advancement of Indiana Youth Institute, with me today. today. It's been the Indiana State Police Roadshow. We'll catch you again next week. Roadshow is out.